Hey everyone, it's Antoinette of Montalvo International. I am so glad to have you all here on the Montalvo International Women in Life and Leadership podcast. My name is Antoinette Montalvo, and I am your host of the My Will podcast, where the focus is for your will and my will to represent His will. We are right in the thick of a Kingdom Chat series where we've been talking about really that understanding that comes from when Jesus said, His kingdom come, His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we know that in Mathew 6:33, it says, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And so we really want to talk about and dive into the importance of those kingdom chats and the importance of just different things that is going to invite the kingdom of heaven into our very lives, especially as women in life and leadership. There are so many different things that we have our hand to the plow in. We are trying to identify different things that we need to do, different connections that we need to make, but really who God is calling us to be and where we need to go. Now, if you have not tracked with this podcast before, we've covered a variety of topics from mental health and motherhood, marriage and relationships, finance, small business, and everything in between. But this particular series, as I mentioned, is really talking about how can we invite the kingdom of heaven right here on earth. And so the focus of this topic, I have a very special guest that we're going to be talking about kingdom identity and just really understanding how God calls us when we are called to embrace His identity for our lives. It's very easy to be pulled by so many different opinions, so many different things, even the thoughts that we have about ourselves. But what is most important and what we have to recognize is that when Jesus leads us accordingly to what we need to do, all that matters is what He says about us. And so I think you're going to love this episode. I have like I said, a very special guest who I think is, kind of this queen of confidence, so to speak. And you'll see why I use that title for this particular guest. But just thinking about how God has led her, what He's led her to do, the platform that He's led her to have, but more importantly, how He has taken her from a place where maybe she wasn't sure where she was going to where God has been able to use her in a way, as she will say, and we got a chance to talk a little bit behind the scenes on it, to be the salt and light of the earth. So I'm going to invite Chantel O'Brian in just to tell her story, her journey, and just thinking about how she has used her confidence platform to really embrace her kingdom identity and to allow her to not only do the great things that God is calling her to do, but to be the great person that God is calling her to be. So Chantel, welcome so much into the episode. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being on the My Will podcast. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me, Antoinette. It's a pleasure to be here. Every time you get that question, tell me about yourself, you're always like, okay, where should I start, right?
Right.
So I guess I'll just kind of start as to where I began and how I got to who I am today, right? So it'll all kind of make sense.
Yeah.
I came from very humble beginnings, very, you know, I came from a single parent home. It was me and my mom always. And I grew up in an inner city community. And a lot of times what I would have aspired to be or what I'd see on television and the things that really piqued my interest, I wasn't seeing live in person outside of like my community within church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that was kind of my first, I would say, tug to trying to figure out, okay, who am I going to become? Because I mean, it's easy to become a statistic, right?
Right.
It's harder to become like something that it's harder for you to say from the beginning of everything that this is what the Lord has said. And it's easy to just become a statistic and just go with the world, right? So that's what led me into pageantry, kind of starting from there and knowing that I didn't have what I was looking for. And I wanted to be whatever it is that I was looking for, because I wasn't quite sure what that was yet either. Yeah. And so I went into pageantry. Youth empowerment, youth development was my platform, my focus. It's been my focus for years up until today. And it's what's led me to this particular point. And so right before I got started with the Final Crown, and that's to kind of nudge the whole confidence conference thing. Mm-hmm. The Final Crown actually started during COVID. Okay. And COVID was one of like my lowest moments. Mm-hmm. Like if I was really asking the Lord who I was, it was in 2020 because I think
we all were asking. I think we were all asking.
Because we believe that the Lord is speaking certain things to us, and then when the thing doesn't really flourish or blossom into what we thought it was going to be, we're questioning things. So originally I felt from the Lord that I needed to leave my job and just step out and focus on my coaching business. So I'm the founder and head coach of P.S. O'Brian Consulting, and that stemmed from my pageant background. And so from there, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then COVID happened. I'm like, well, I can't do that no more because I didn't build enough time. I didn't have enough time to build and to market and to show. And the job that I'm meant to be doing, it takes seeing people. It takes in person, you know? And so going into 2020, the Lord placed on my heart the final crown. Well, that was originally something that was going to be just more on the faith, but beauty side of things, more inspirational. And then he was like, no, we're going to go a little deeper than that. That was cute, but we're going to go a little deeper. And so I found myself from doing a roundtable talk into the following year doing my first confidence conference, which was virtual and which was the theme perfection is a myth. And so one of the things identity isn't in the world's view is perfection, right? But we know that we serve a perfect God. And so we know that we are created in his image. So even from then, the Lord was already kind of like trying to teach me or whatever. And sometimes we can be a little bullheaded, but he was teaching me from then what it is that he wanted to do. And so a lot of my identity sometimes got caught up in the pageant world, right? Especially when the Lord gloried in my life in 2021. So I was competing since 2013. I competed back to back. I didn't win my first two pageants. And I remember asking the Lord, I was like, okay, Lord, I'm not surprised. In 2014, I went home and I cried in my room and I said, I'm not surprised I didn't win. Like, why would they pick somebody like me from where I'm from? Right? I didn't say like, oh yeah, Lord, it's just not my time yet because you call me this, you call me that, I'm chosen. No, I was like, they saw where I came from. They'd see where I live. They would never crown someone like me. And so, you know, when I think about that time of my life and then I see that 2015 was the following year when I won Miss World Bahamas, I thought that was it. And so for me, I was like, okay, destiny fulfilled, identity found. I am a queen, you know?
There you go.
And you don't realize that when you are in this area of confidence or any area where you're called to lead, there's significant warfare that comes with it.
Yes.
And if you don't know how to fight, you know, there'll be low moments, a lot of low moments. And at that time, I didn't know how to fight that. I didn't understand patterns. I didn't understand why certain cycles took place. I didn't understand why, you know, I felt like there was more, but I couldn't get to it. It always felt like stagnation or delay or certain like even physical attacks on my life. I just couldn't figure it out. And up until recent, it was like, okay, like whenever you're in this kind of space and the Lord is calling to a great thing, the enemy doesn't want to hear that. The enemy doesn't want to know. Like, he doesn't want to hear that you know who you are in Christ. And so he's going to find different ways to discourage you or to make you think that whatever the Lord spoke to you was a lie. And so when 2021 came around, I started the confidence conference and all of the things. And then the Lord was like, okay, you're going to go and compete again. I was competing for a title I competed for in 2013 that I didn't win. And I was okay that I didn't win. I just was so surprised that I got that far. I was like, yeah, you know? And so he's like, no, we're going to do it again. I was like, but I lost like 2 times first before I won the last one. And the last one didn't pan out like I thought because I was getting ready to give everybody else the glory except for God. That's why.
Right.
So I was getting ready to be like, thank you to everybody else. A little bit on God, but thank you to everybody else. And so he
not that
knew
you were
that.
upset or anything, right?
Yeah, you know. And so when he told me to go back and do this competition, you know, I struggled with that. I struggled with that because for a long time, you know, pageantry was a lot of what I knew. And though I was working with clients already, I believe that the Lord was unlocking so much more. So a lot of what I know now and what I teach clients, and even before going to Miss Universe, I had none of that in my arsenal competing early on. And so after he gloried in my life in 2021 and decided that me, being the most least likely to place,
as it always is,
Universe,
it's always like that.
I'm like, I'm 5'7". I competed with short hair, like. Me? Like, what do you mean? And so for him to say, okay, I'm going to glory in your life this way, that's for me, Antoinette, when I really needed to seek him as far as my identity looks
Mm-hmm.
like. Because when you get to that point and it's a public glory and
Mm-hmm.
people start to put you on a bit of a pedestal
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you feel like, okay, God, what else could you do? Because I remember I came back from Miss Universe and someone was like, more, there's more to come. And I was like, "What more?" And I feel like that stifles the Lord so much
Mm-hmm.
because now I'm looking at him in my own like fragile capabilities, right? And I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at him like he couldn't do more because he's called me to do more, right?
Right.
Um, and I was just thinking of something that Paul said in Second Corinthians, I think it's chapter 11 or 12, where he's like, he's not boasting within himself. He doesn't want to boast in
Mm-hmm.
himself. He's like, I'll boast
Mm-hmm.
in my weakness
Yes.
instead,
Yes.
and all of these different things. And if you tell me that, you serve Christ or you're doing this, I am more. Like I've done more. Like this is it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I didn't have that language at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm boasting in what I could see.
Right.
I could see the mirror, I could connect the dots that way. But it was hard for me to say, God, you've chosen me, and I'm not just this one thing. I'm more
Right.
than just what meets the eye. And I think when we talk about confidence, it sounds like a common word, but there's certain seasons of my life where I'm not as confident. As a matter of
Mm.
fact, every confidence conference, the enemy gets slicker than
Yes,
usual.
yes, he does. He always ramps up when it's some kind of breakthrough. Always, always.
And then
It's
comes for me every single time.
mm,
And I'm questioning myself and I'm
mm,
questioning God. And
mm,
I'm just like, okay, Lord, let's just get it over with.
mm,
I had to realize that was a pattern and I had to break that,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so when we talk about identity, I think that it's important for us. I had shared recently, right after the confidence conference this year, that I'm just this overzealous, clumsy, ambitious girl that don't get it right, all the time. And the Lord knows that, but He's
mm-hmm,
identified me as so much more than just
mm,
the overzealous girl who's clumsy and ambitious, because we can be all those things if we're all those things in the right places.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
that's where we get the loss of identity, because a lot of us, we have like an idea of our identity. We're just putting the attention and the focus in the wrong places,
mm-hmm.
being nurtured incorrectly, and they're not being cultivated right until you find the Lord and you're like, oh, this overzealous thing is just like me being excited for what could be
There you go.
because you've called me to more. This
Mm-hmm.
clumsy thing isn't that I don't have stability. It's just that I'm trying to walk. I'm like Peter. I'm trying to get out the boat. I'm trying to walk on water. You
There
know
you
what I
go.
mean? I'm trying to be like, because he was definitely kind of clumsy getting out there and everything like that. And then I'm ambitious. I'm ambitious because my Lord is ambitious. Look at the world around me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's ambition. He was like, and we're going to do this. We're going to do this. It's going to look like that. It's going to look like that. And then years later, it's going to turn into this. And people are going to be like, whoa, after 100 years, this is what happened. Like, God didn't know that was going to happen. Please. He created it.
Yep.
So, yeah, I
That's
say
so
all that to
good.
say that it's always like a constant going back to the face of the Lord
Mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm.
be reminded.
Yeah. And I think you hit on so many key points in every single bit of it. And, if I could do a part 2, 3, and 4, I probably would, just to pick apart the nuggets that you placed in there. Just, a couple of the things that stood out to me is number one, recognizing that when you finally realized you can't put limitations on God, right? It's very easy, especially when we get into spaces that we feel uncomfortable in or that we have to be stretched in, that suddenly all these limitations get put into place when it was God who was doing it the entire time, right? It was never us. It was never us really leading the point. And so I love how you allowed yourself to say, you know what? Very much like Elijah when God said, look again, when he talked about sent
Yes.
his servant out to look for that cloud. And it was like, I don't see the cloud. You didn't see the pageant. You didn't see the crown. You didn't see the title yet. And God said, look again, very much like Elijah told his servant, look again, look again. And that took up to 7 times, right? And I
Yeah.
think even if I think about, your timeline specifically, you said you started in 2013 and how we think about, 7 years plus maybe one more when God said, look again, where he took you to that world stage. Look how timely he is and strategic he is with everything that he does. And so it's so amazing when we're able to yield to God's will. Again, very much how this podcast is focused on, it's coined my will, but a lot of it is tearing down so much of our will or my will and saying, Lord, what is your will? What is your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so I love how you really said, you know what, Lord, I will try again. I may not have gotten it here. And the very thing that he was preparing you for, God knows the end from the beginning, right? He is the author and finisher of our lives. And so that he knew the end from the beginning. He knew that you would get to a point where you'd have to say, I have to push past my discomfort right now and try again. I have to choose to believe that he sees something more in me than I do. And I think that's, again, that's so much of that kingdom identity piece is recognizing that it's no longer about what you only see. Yes, he's giving you the gifts and the talents, right? He gave you the beauty sense. He gave you the fashion sense. He gave you that outlook. He instilled that talent into you, but you had to say, Lord, I take these gifts and talents very much like, the parable of those who had the talents and say, I give it back to you to
Yeah.
produce more. You chose not to bury it, right? You chose not to
Yeah.
hide it under, and buried it in the ground and say, Lord, I know you're a hard taskmaster. Here you have me competing in all these pageants. Here you've had
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
compete pageant after pageant and I'm just gonna not do this anymore. And so I love how he allowed you to be pushed and stretched until you got to that point where you went even further. And of course, there is no limits with him. When you're created in his image, there's no limits with him. And so that was one of those biggest things that stood out to me when you were talking, just in terms of how God progressed you. And then I really just saw David highlighted in you when you talked about your humble beginnings to where God brought you, right? When David was anointed, he was in the field. he was
Yep.
he was overlooked. He wasn't even counted. Even when Samuel came, he wasn't even in the lineup with the brothers. And Samuel said, "Is there not anyone else out here?" So amazing how God takes these small places and he elevates them, right? He
Yes.
absolutely elevates them, and it's so beautiful to see that. And it's so beautiful to see how he used what felt like a humble beginning, but really you were living out that storyline that God had set all along so that you knew it was all for him and not for you, right? Very much how
Yeah.
John said, less of me and more of you when it
True.
was time for Jesus to be glorified completely. And so I could go on and on and on, and I know our time is limited. But I don't know if you could talk a little bit about maybe one of the biggest challenges apart from just mindset. What were one of the biggest challenges that you had to kind of get over in that hurdle of saying, here I am building myself up to do this thing, seeing it on the outside, but not knowing if I'm equipped for it, and then allowing yourself to not only springboard into, pageantry and then doing, the Miss Universe and World Bahamas and all these different things that you did, and then consulting and coaching and et cetera. And you touched on some of them, but what was one that felt like the biggest hurdle where God had to say, do you believe my identity for you, or do you only see your own identity in this?
Yeah. I really love this question because and I'm actually going to go in and out from like the pageantry aspect of it. But when I was competing, I felt the most inferior when it came to being a believer.
Mm-hmm.
Felt like I was like, okay, God, like some people are singing and dancing, they're like doing other things. You've given
Mm-hmm.
them other other areas of creativity to explore. Why me and why this? I
Mm-hmm.
felt like it wasn't good enough. And I felt like especially because it's themed in a secular space, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
in an industry that is secular. It's like, you sure you know nothing else for me to do? Because I'm really, it's not giving. And I remember I was on a youth panel during some like youth conference or something like this. This was 2014. So it was the year before I won Miss World Bahamas.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it clear as day because like I would just never get over it because I was already kind of like looking in the Lord's face about this.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there was someone that was asking about like, confidence and they were asking about like self-esteem and stuff like that and
Mm-hmm.
like attire and things. And I said, well, if somebody, there's a difference in attire. Some outfits can give confidence, but some of them give maybe wanting more attention or et cetera, whatever have you. And then so they were asking me about like swimsuits and stuff like that and why I pose in swimsuits. And the thing was like, I was like, I wish I posed in swimsuits like all the time. Like I posed in swimsuit in competition, like, and so I remember the first lady at church came up to the mic and she was like, I used to be like you when I was in the world. And I was like, I'm not in the world. Like, what are you saying? And I just felt so attacked. And I was like, I'm not in the world. What do you mean? Like,
little
so
do
it's
you
like,
know.
And so I was like, at the time I was just kind of not dumbfounded because I had a response, but I just didn't want to respond because, obviously in spaces like that, it could become a little bit more defensive. And I was still learning from the Lord because I was still asking the Lord certain questions about why he called me into this and why did he feel like this is something that I should be identified with. And so when he asked me, that was really one of the reasons why when I competed in 2015, I was like, okay, I competed in 2015. I was like, now, sir, why? Because I was getting pressure. The people was coming for me. And I knew that I wasn't just doing it off of my own volition. So like, like, what is this? And I believe that, everybody has their own path. And that's not to call anyone into anything that they're not supposed to be in, because I'll never make excuses for nothing that the Lord has not released someone to do. But I believe that the Lord wanted to make a point as to the different industries that needs to be permeated with his presence. Absolutely. Right? Because right now, a person won't remember the last time they saw me in a swimsuit, but they'll definitely remember the last impact I made through whatever it is he placed on my heart to do. And I think that was a really big thing for me because I saw pageantry as a sport, and it's still a sport to me, but everyone didn't identify it as a sport. And then that's why I looked at it as, oh my God, like people are going to judge me. And if I say I love the Lord and I'm praising the Lord, they're not going to believe me. They're going to think that, oh, well, if you love him so much, then why are you in pageants or whatever have you? And so that's why I always affirm for people that this is a vain industry. It is dark. It is secular. I'm not going to sit around and be like, oh, no, it's never like that. It is like that. And there's just a few people within this industry that I've been able to connect with that are God-fearing people that love the Lord, that do not compromise when it comes to him. And we are the people that have to, for those that he's called to do the same thing, we have to be an example for them so that they don't fall for what's easy to fall for, right? Because the way to hell is very wide. There's plenty of room, and it's very narrow when you're trying to get, heavenly bound. And so I think that's like one of the biggest things I've had to overcome, believing that, you want me to be doing this for a reason, because otherwise find me something else to do, Lord. Find me something else to do. And so I've been able to flip from all of that right now. And still coach and still empower and still share with people what I've learned. And, so many young girls look up to me and I'm like, well, if you look up to me, if you really want some advice, if you want to know how I was able to do it, check out my God. Like, just check him out. Yep. And I'm telling you, like, he's going to blow your mind. I'm a firm believer in that. And I'm the perfect example of that, especially coming from, being of Haitian heritage as well. Like, so like now it's not just like, for example, just being the face of the Bahamas on a worldwide stage. There are girls that, they have been attacked for the family tree. They didn't even know they didn't even have to be born into the family tree. Yes. And so now they're being told that they don't belong in certain places from the beginning. And so now they see the person that was, I was bullied and teased in primary school and junior school from my background. You hear my mom talk and you're like, oh yeah, And so I've had to endure a lot of that earlier on. I've had to endure like knowing that I had something about me, but nobody being able to see it and it being overlooked, because obviously when you're planted, you're still growing. And, people don't stop and look at the garden when, you just sprouting. Yeah. They wait till you then. out on a limb and then they're touching you and then they might just hug you, that's when people pay attention to you. They pay attention to you until you're full. And so I think I'd say that's been like the biggest challenge that I've had to overcome in that time. And in recent, and I shared this at the confidence conference, would be not being stuck on God's past glory.
That's good.
Because he's already, like, because if he's orchestrated this, and you can look at like the path, people like, oh, I see why he did it that way. Then he's already done the next thing. Like he's done moved on.
Yeah.
He's just waiting for you to catch up. And so I've had to like not hang on to that, like hang on to, oh God, and I have to be this, and I have to be as good as what this was.
Yeah.
I can't compete with God's glory. I just can't.
Yeah. Like he says, we go from glory to glory. And again, and our time is winding down. I want to honor your time in that. But just again, there's so many things that popped out to me in that, and all of those nuggets. But the biggest one on this one was just Esther, right? When she was called for such a time as this, right? Where Esther came from that point where it was like, why me, God? Why me? But yet you answered the call, and he was the one who put you in place for that. And so I'm thankful that you represent God well everywhere that you are. And as you mentioned, when we were talking kind of behind the scenes about being that salt and light. And I think a lot of identity is in that, right? It's about being salt and light. And for those who are familiar with that verse where, Jesus says you don't want the salt to lose its savor. You have to put salt in order to preserve things. And then also, you don't want to hide a light under a bushel. You don't want to hide it under a lamp. We are a city set on the hill. And so what God did for you was set you on a hill. He set you on a hill because he knew, number one, that you would give him glory. Number two, that you would be able to illuminate who he is. And then number three, you were able to dispel the lies that the enemy would try to throw in from, unfortunately, those who are the religious leaders that would say, how could God use you in this particular platform? But that's where identity comes in place, and understanding what God is saying about your identity. And then that key piece that you said was only doing what he's calling you to do. If he doesn't call you to do it, he's not going to anoint you for it. He's not going to grace you for it. He's not going to provide what he needs. But if he calls you for it, very much like Esther, when you're called for such a time as this, he will give you the grace to step up to that royal platform. Pun intended. So I thank God for how he did that. That's the Bahamian roots probably coming out in me with the puns, but I thank God for just how he's led you, how he's continuing to lead you, and how he continues to use you to let his glory shine. I think that's the best place that we can be, where we are, again, like I said before, less of us and more of him, so that he can shine that much brighter. And so I thank you so much, Chantel, for just sharing your life, your journey, how God has been leading you, a bit of your story, and just what he's doing for you right now. And before we wrap up, I don't know if there's any last minute tips, links, things that you want to promote before I let you go.
Well, the only thing I want to say is that whenever it comes to identity, a lot of the questions, they aren't outward, they're inward. And sometimes, I'm a professional yapper. So I'll be talking to the Lord, but I'll be doing too much talking instead of just listen, And so if there's anyone that's like still trying to figure out, okay, what am I doing? Like, what's my identity? Like, who is God calling me to be? Sometimes you have to sit still and listen. And of course, reading your word, but like you have to be able to listen and not talk so much, because all of that talking, and you're not allowing yourself to hear the Lord the way that you're meant to hear him. And then also too, everybody else will always have an opinion as to who you are. But the only opinion that matters is that of the Lord, and his opinion is an opinion, is a fact. So always stay postured in just, okay, Lord, this is what you're saying. So this is what I'm going to do. And this is how I'm going to walk, knowing that this is how you called me. You know what I mean? Because even when we mentioned David, like he didn't know he was a king at that point, but he rolled in like he was a king. So he walked in that even from the beginning. He walked in like, who are you? Who's this guy? How y'all have him doing this, talking like this about my God? Like, who is this? He rolled in like who he would have been in the future, because we saw like as his story progressed, David did not play when it came to handling business. Yes. And so that's how you have to walk when you're postured before the Lord and you start to get some insight as to, okay, this is what it looks like. You have to walk in that. So that's just encouragement to everybody listening. And, you can stay up to date with me on Instagram, on Facebook. Meet Chantel on Instagram, Chantel with a C, and Chantel O'Brian on Facebook. And you could follow The Final Crown at The Final Crown _ if you'd like to learn more about the Confidence Conference. My heart is to build a bigger confidence community that's just outside of the conference as a whole, to be able to talk about different topics. That's not just about, when people hear confidence, they think of low, high self-esteem. Right. It's so much more than that, right? It's about the things that we did discuss during our conversations, which was identity, purpose, boundaries, obedience, like so many of these different things that the Lord is going to stretch us in to really make sure that we stay centered in Him. So yeah.
That's so good. Well, thank you so much, Chantel, for being a part of this. We'll put all of her links into the show notes so that you all can follow along and make sure that you continue in that journey that God has her in, and then just being able to be encouraged in your own journey. And so we thank you so much. Applause to you. Thank you so much, Chantel, for being able to be vulnerable and just transparent and use the giftings that God has given you. Once again, my name is Antoinette Montalvo. I am your host of Montalvo International Women in Life and Leadership. And this podcast, the My Will podcast, is really just focused on where your will and my will match up with His will. And we have been in this Kingdom Chat series, this particular episode on kingdom identity and just recognizing God's truth in our lives as we seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, knowing all these other things will be added to us. So make sure that you know who God is calling you to be. Take that time, like Chantel shared, just to sit before Him. Drown out the noise of everything else that you think you may know. Even if you've sat with Him before and say, you know what, Lord, what are you saying about me today? What is it that you desire about me today? What is it that you want me to do today to represent your glory? And the most important thing is just recognizing that you are loved by Him. He has created you for great things. You are created in His image, and just know that you are destined to do great things for His kingdom and for His glory in Jesus' name. Stay tuned for the new and next episode coming up, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.